Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 71. You're watching two guys who have nothing better to do than sit down and talk about Anglican news. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger. And this week's episode is brought to you by Forward and Faith and 5 Talents. And today is May 9th, 2013.
George, let's move on to Newport Beach. We're going to talk about St. James. Quick background here. Last week, the judge made a summary judgment saying that all the evidence points to the fact that the Episcopal Church retains ownership of St. James Newport Beach despite all other considerations. And the first thing you say is, you've got to be kidding. The law is clearly in California on the side of the church. What happens? And then you got to say to yourself, and I'm going to read the Bible verse from 1 Corinthians 6:6. When one of you has a grievance against another, does he dare to go to law before the unrighteous instead of the saints? And that's exactly what this speaks to. I would probably do it too, go to the courts, the secular courts, to ask for a fair ruling on Christian and legal matters. It's fraught with problems. The law happens to be our worst enemy, even when we are on the right side of it, George.
God's justice is not legal justice. Mm-hmm. Now, we have the best justice system in the world in the United States. It's a system to be proud of. But still, we have bad outcomes happen all the time. To think of the O.J. Simpson case. In my part of the world, we recently had the Casey Anthony trial. Yeah. But I think I do want to laud the people at St. James Newport Beach, first of all. Now, you and Alan Haley will talk about the details of the case, but I really want to raise up Richard Crocker, the rector there, and the leadership of the congregation. When they received notice that things had turned out badly against them, and they've been fighting this since 2003, 2004, Richard did not whine, he didn't complain. He showed a degree of Christian fortitude and charity and love, and prefaced all this by saying God is in charge. And that shows to me a degree of maturity in the faith that is in very short supply in the wider Episcopal Church. I'm not saying just roll over and die and take it, but at the same time, I'm saying that their attitude, they've not lost their faith through this terrible ordeal. It's, in many ways, I think it's been strengthened.
Yeah, I mean, they're right now in the position where the vestry has to decide, where do we go from here? Do we file an appeal? Do we just walk away? Do we start looking for another building? And in that, I think they're going to really discover more faith as they have to determine the course, from here. It's interesting because I just flew to Newport Beach to attend the Anglican Men's Weekend. Right as I get off the plane, I'm getting an email from a friend of mine, Keith Bramlett, who goes to St. James, saying, Kevin, there's a meeting tonight at church. Apparently the courts have come down against us, and we're talking about what's going to happen. And I sat at St. James Church as the congregation learned for the first time that the judge has ruled against them. And there was a lot of disappointment and sad looks on people's face, because they've spent a lot of money in secular courts trying to get the law, which is on their side, to protect them. And it didn't happen. And we as Christians can't be surprised when, our justice system, who's supposed to be blind, makes blind, mute, deaf decisions. And, hear no evil, see no evil type thing. And boy, it happened to St. James. I'm not surprised that it happened, for the fact that there is evil in the world, and evil can exist in the legal system, even the fairest legal system in the world.
We have to keep a split mind on these things. In the secular world, in the fleshy world, there is this legal process that, in St. James' case, it's not over. They can choose to end it if they wish to, but they don't have to, and it's not going to be a drop-dead thing in the next week or so. That's the secular side, and then there's the spiritual side. And so long as they're able to keep the two separate, to allow their faith not to be intertwined in a strive for justice and a strive for revenge against John Bruno or anything like that, then all will turn out well.
George, let's move on and talk about an international story. We're going to talk about New Zealand. Last week, New Zealand appeared on the map of Anglican news for the first time in a long time because Bishop Ross Bay denied a person's request to become a seminarian. He denied it on the contention that this person was an open homosexual in a same-sex relationship. And for a person like you and I, that should be, oh yeah, of course he did, because that makes sense. This bishop kind of tripped into biblical orthodoxy. This makes news because the province of New Zealand is not known for its conservative ideology. It has a strange history of white guilt, and every time it makes news because it's done something extremely liberal beyond the liberalness of tech or other places. And we're talking about New Zealand because it has an international flavor. You've heard the quote that what happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas. We're going to prove that what happens in New Zealand doesn't stay in New Zealand, George.
You're absolutely right, Kevin. I'll give you some background. For the last 6 years, Eugene Cisneros, who is a lay employee of St. Matthew's in the City in Auckland, New Zealand, has been attempting to join the ordination process, and he has been blocked in doing so. He filed a lawsuit with the Human Rights Review Tribunal accusing the Bishop Ross Bay of Auckland of discrimination against homosexuals. Now, New Zealand's human rights laws forbid employment discrimination against on basis of gender or sexual orientation. Now, you may think that, well, New Zealand has the same rules that we do, that a priest, someone in the ordination process must lead a chaste and godly, holy life. Well, Mr. Cisneros really has a good, strong case. Now, last year, the Archbishop of New Zealand, who is the head of the Anglican team at the Archic Movement conference, Archbishop Moxon, told the press that we do not hold the same views on homosexuality as Catholics. We don't think it's a sin while they do. And there are a lot of gay clergy in New Zealand. And there are bishops who wink, wink, nod, nod, allow gay people to go through the process so long as they keep their mouth closed about it. And Mr. Cisneros is saying, look, I'm just being honest about something, and I'm being blocked for my being honest. And that violates the civil rights laws if you look around at everybody else in the Anglican Church in New Zealand. So we may have a situation where the government in New Zealand will compel the church to ordain gay people because the church has not taken a firm stand saying why this is wrong.
Well, the church, the Anglican Communion has. They have Lambeth 110. But because they don't enforce Lambeth 110 on an international regiment, we have, obviously, the Episcopal Church has gay clergy and gay bishops. We have the Church of England has gay clergy. You can go around the world and find that people are getting away with gay clergy, and there's just no way to hold anybody accountable. Therefore, this seminarian wannabe can say, listen, New Zealand, obviously a liberal place, has stated at the bishop level this is okay, and the Anglican Communion welcomes homosexual people into clerical roles, and why should I be held back? Now, this brings up the whole slippery slope issue of letting the nation dictate to the church who they can be, who they can hire, and what they can do. And I got to say, this is a slippery slope in New Zealand, and it's a slippery slope here in America because of the discrimination clauses, George.
Human rights laws are trumping religious liberty and religious freedom. We're seeing this on a political level in the United States. We're seeing this in New Zealand, which just passed gay marriage laws. And its clergy may be compelled to solemnize gay weddings. Even if they think it's a sin, they're not allowed to say so because their churches haven't taken a firm stance, and therefore they're discriminating against gay people. We're seeing this push to privilege one group above religious belief all around the world. Last week, we reported on Anglican Inc. about how the West Indian bishops were really ticked off with the Obama administration for pushing their governments to legalize gay marriage. You poor people in Belize, well, we won't give you any aid money unless you change your draconian laws outlawing gay marriage. Well, the West Indian bishop said, no, we're not going to knuckle under, and we don't want the government to either. But there's a real push around the world that has troubling consequences for religious freedom and religious belief.
I mean, if you can't beat Christianity, you can certainly outlaw it. And that happened in Rome. It's going to happen here too.
Foreign faith is the vehicle and the organism for the continuation of the Oxford movement, which is, in fact, a continuation of the faith of the one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church.
I have on the other side of my webcam Alan Haley, and we're going to talk about why you don't go to court. We have many examples of Paul's example of why you don't sue your brother, why you don't go to court, why you don't let secular people decide Christian things. Let's start off first. We had a summary judgment at St. James Newport Beach in favor of the Diocese of Los Angeles. This has been a court case going on for years and years over who owns the property and whether or not the church can go with ACNA, or back then, whatever. Does the church get to decide who owns the property?
Yeah,
the judge in this case says the diocese does.
This case is the equivalent of Dickens' Jarndyce versus Jarndyce that was in the courts for so long. This has been in the courts, California courts, since 2005. It went up to the California Supreme Court twice. It came back down finally for the trial, and then the judge takes the trial away and says, we don't need a trial. After 8 years, they decide we don't need a trial. The issue, of course, that needed a trial was that the Diocese of Los Angeles back in 1991, when it was headed by Bishop Borsch and his canon to the ordinary, his deputy was Canon Bruce McPherson, now the retired Bishop of Western Louisiana. They gave permission to the donors of St. James, who were interested in putting up millions of dollars to acquire more property, prime property down in the ocean, close to the ocean in Newport Beach, California. And of course, since 1991, it's only mushroomed in value. But they went ahead, bought the property on the strength of the letter given to the donors from Bishop McPherson, then Canon McPherson, saying that the diocese waives the interest of the Dennis canon in this property that you're getting. And notwithstanding that letter, of course, Bishop Borsch retired, and then we got J. John Bruno as the Bishop of Los Angeles. And he had a different view when the church voted to leave in 2005. He filed suit against St. James and its rector and vestry, the usual personal claims, and then also asked for the property back, including the property that the donors had acquired on the strength of this letter for the church. And that was what was finally ruled on by this judge in Orange County just last week. She
let me ask you some questions then. Everybody out there is watching, and here's the questions they want to know. Summary judgment, is it all over?
Summary judgment means no trial. You go directly to judgment, and then you have to appeal if you want to take things further. So
they can appeal. Smart moves now that all the cards are on the table, we know what California law, according to this judge, is proposing. Would it be wise for the people who donated to sue under bad pretense?
Well, of course, they can only decide that with their own lawyers. We better not get in the business of handing out legal advice on the air here. But in any event, they should talk about it with their lawyers, because they basically made a gift under condition that they understood to be true, and then the Diocese of Los Angeles reneged on the conditions of that gift, and that could subject the Diocese of Los Angeles to the liability to refund the entire gift plus interest over the years. So it's a serious matter, and I'm sure, I mean, they're big people, and I'm sure they'll take a serious look at it.
Well, there's a point where the judge a long time ago said, let's arbitrate. Go sit down at a table and work it out. And they tossed around the fully funded amount of, you give us $17 million, we'll talk about it. Okay, which is, according to the diocese, what the property is worth. It's a valuable piece of property.
Right.
There's no way to negotiate now.
Well, and they could negotiate, but you know, the diocese holds all the cards at this point, and it's not going to exactly shrink back from that until there's another appeal, and the appeals have uniformly gone poorly for St. James. And so it's not, you know, and yet this decision is so crazy, because what it in effect does, the way the judge reached her decision, she's put a cloud on the title of all former Episcopal Church property that's been sold in the state ever since 1980.
But hold on, according to her ruling, you can't sell property.
Precisely.
Oh, well, here's a problem.
And look at all the property that's been sold, not only real property, rectors' residences and, you know, parish halls and parking lots and all the things that, you know, parishes gradually sell and divest themselves of, but all the rummage sales that they've had and everything like that. I mean, this is just crazy.
It is crazy, and hopefully crazy is something that you can appeal.
I should explain, I mean, for those who didn't, maybe I've jumped too far too soon, but the thing that's really crazy about this is the judge held that the Dennis Canon, the Episcopal Church's Dennis Canon, cannot be waived or released by a single bishop. It can only be waived or released by an action of the body that created it, namely General Convention. So every time now there's going to be a sale of this property in Southern California under this judge's ruling of Episcopal Church property, they're going to have to go get a permission of General Convention to sign off on the Dennis Canon. And that's never been done before, ever, in any diocese in any state. And that's why, as I say, this ruling is just simply crazy. Could
Episcopalians within the Diocese of Los Angeles sue the bishop for selling properties without permission? I'm asking here as a concerned citizen.
The possibilities are endless. As St. Paul said, watch out what you wish for when you go to civil court. You never know what you're going to end up with. It could be something far worse than what you started with.
Okay, let's move on to some good news.
Okay.
Once in a while, in a blue moon, you get good legal results. And so far, San Joaquin, the first diocese to leave the Episcopal Church in this century, is doing pretty good.
Yeah, well, we knock on wood, but we are we are doing all right, because the trial judge in Fresno there just recently reaffirmed his tentative ruling after considering it carefully for over a month and looking at the transcripts and everything. He came back, reaffirmed his original ruling that the Episcopal Church could not get summary judgment against the diocese because it had failed in its burden of proof to show to the court any provisions in its constitution or canons that prevent a diocese from withdrawing from the church. So, and he said the burden's going to be on them to come up with something at trial. Well, we, know how that's going to go. They're just going to get up and hire Professor Mullen to come in and opine that, well, all this, little this, and this, and there's no diocese that ever land bumbo jumbo. But they won't be able to point to any language, and that's their problem.
But hold on, that's the interesting thing. I want to go quickly back here to the St. James case. They brought in experts, and they said, well, there's nothing to go on. Let's make up the most cockamamie story possible about the Dennis Canon, and maybe the judge will buy it.
Yeah.
They did, and the judge, oh yeah, it makes sense to me. Yeah. Now, is that something they could do here in San Joaquin?
No, because the Dennis Canon doesn't apply to diocesan property.
All right.
It was passed by bishops, so they weren't going to let their own property be subject to it. It was only other people's property that they wanted to glom onto. So the Dennis Canon is this unique creature. As I say, it's the Episcopal Church's Trojan horse, in my view, because it never, ever should have gone down that road and been lured into trying to put a lien on other people's property. It's just totally alienated more people from the church than probably any other thing about the Episcopal Church today.
So as soon as tomorrow, Friday, they release court cases, we may learn about Texas.
Yes, Texas Supreme Court now reaching the point where we could expect its decision any week, and they tend to publish their decisions on a Friday. Tomorrow's Friday, so we'll find out if that's it or if it's going to have to be another week or two.
Okay. South Carolina, let's do a quick update.
Everything's in federal court there now.
Everything's in federal now, okay.
Yeah, they've managed to, the Bishop von Rosenberg and his rump diocese filed what's called a removal of the state court action that Bishop Lawrence and his parish has brought to protect their trademark and title to their property. And that's all been removed now to the federal court on the ground that only the federal courts can decide First Amendment issues, and that's crazy. They've recently filed their responses saying, rather in contradictory terms, this Bishop von Rosenberg and his diocese, that in contradicting themselves by saying, well, we have to be in federal court under the Lanham Act, the Trademark Act, because this is our trademark and it's being infringed, and these competitors, I mean, think of a church as a competitor. How awful. Are ruining our business, and we need an injunction to keep them from using our name. And then they say, but at the same time, the First Amendment requires this litigation to be in federal court. Well, news for them. I mean, practically every great church property case under the First Amendment, starting with Jones v. Wolfe, came up through the Supreme Court through state courts. So there's nothing unique about the First Amendment that has to be litigated in federal court, and we'll see what the judge does with that argument.
The greatest hope for a lawyer is one day to argue before the Supreme Court.
I've been there and done that.
Okay, and you hope that they understand neutral principles, and you also hope they take an interest in your case. And the Presbyterians kind of have a Dennis Cannon of their own. And they've been before the Supreme Court recently, and they were denied.
That's right. The Supreme Court just on April 29th denied a petition for certiorari from I think it's the Evansville Presbytery in Indiana, asking it to reverse the Indiana Supreme Court's ruling that the trust clause in the Presbyterian Book of Order did not have any effect to create a trust interest in a local parish property.
This is kind of funny how the Supreme Court works, because you told me this and somebody else has told me this, that it's not that they don't care. Right. They want it to be worked out further in the courts and just see how bad it gets before they step in.
That's it. They basically let it just steam and bubble and cauldron, boil and bubble in the lower courts and in the states to see what kind of a mess gets cooked up, and then they all come riding in and say, no, this is the way it ought to be. And they haven't done that yet, and they're not ready to do it yet.
It's crazy. It's going to take. Other than the Presbyterians and the Episcopals, I mean, when else would they really go to for church law?
That's it. I mean, those have created the bulk of the church law problems because of these various canons, and that was the direct result of taking up Justice Blackmun in his infamous invitation by dictum in Jones v. Wolfe in 1979, saying, oh, these trust cases don't have to be complicated. The churches can simply enact a provision in their national constitution making a trust, and we courts will be bound to honor it. Well, Justice Blackmun, no, that isn't the way the law works. You don't get to say just how constitutional law is. It has to be you and your 7 justices together, 9 justices together, making the law, and only you made that remark. But all the churches picked up on it, and I'm saying the Episcopal and the Methodist and the Presbyterian churches picked up on it, and that's what's been causing the bulk of the litigation ever since.
Well, my question is, and it's not in the Constitution, but scholars walk around and say separation of church and state. Well, if ever there was an idealism for the state not deciding church matters, it would be applying ecclesiastical canons to neutral principles.
Well, and now this is also a wrinkle on the South Carolina argument that I forgot to mention. They're saying it's not a property case there. This is not about property. This is who is the Bishop of South Carolina. Well, and that's an ecclesiastical question that we get to decide as the Episcopal Church. Well, that same argument was tried in the San Joaquin case before the Court of Appeal there the first time around, and the court said, yes, that's an ecclesiastical question. The civil courts cannot decide who is the Bishop of South Carolina or Bishop of San Joaquin, and so therefore this argument is self-defeating. So that's what we'll see. One final note on Quincy, the trial there, I should report, came to a conclusion last week. The Episcopal Church put on only 2 witnesses. and the rest of it was rebuttal by the Diocese of Quincy. And it's now under submission by the judge. He's called for some post-trial briefing, which will happen in a couple of weeks. There'll be simultaneous briefs from each side, and then after another couple of weeks, there'll be simultaneous reply briefs submitted by each side, and only then will he take it under submission and actually decide the case. So we're probably a couple of months away from any decision in Quincy.
Yeah, I got a lawyer here. We should talk about what happens when both sides have rested. It's not over yet.
Right.
There's times for people to file briefs back and forth, and each brief gets shorter and shorter and shorter per the judge's instructions.
That's right.
And finally, he's left with 5 pages of exactly what he wants.
Hopefully the argument has been concentrated down. He did make the observation, I understand, or at the close of the trial, this whole case has been about people's opinion. That's all he's heard as through the whole case is people's opinion as to whether the Episcopal Church is hierarchical, whether a diocese can leave the church. It's all opinion because, again, there's nothing in writing.
Well, there's nothing. Well, there's nothing in writing in the church laws, but there is in state law.
Well, of course, even in state law, yes, religious corporations can amend their articles in accordance with state law, and that's what the Diocese of Quincy did. Right. And the Diocese of San Joaquin did as well, and the Diocese of Fort Worth. They all acted under state law to amend their articles, and there's nothing in the Episcopal Church Constitution of Canada that says that a diocese can't amend its articles in any way it wants. Again, General Convention does not simply sit in review of all these actions by the various dioceses, and they are free to do what they want. And of course, there's also the First Amendment again, that now, as applied to the states, says that state courts cannot restrict corporations, as well as persons, from exercising their rights of association under the First Amendment. They can choose to associate with a group if they want, they can withdraw if they want, and nobody can put a restriction on that. So that's the uphill battle that these church diocese cases face for the Episcopal Church.
I've just been thinking while you're talking about this federal Supreme Court and taking so long to decide this. Is this just their way of keeping you guys employed?
Yeah. I could wish their employment on happier subjects. And of course, it's keeping the Episcopal Church attorneys well employed. They're thoroughly well paid. Most of the attorneys on the other side have to proceed by donating an awful lot of their time and services because the parties just simply can't raise the money or can't afford to pay for it.
Yeah. All right, Alan, next week we'll have a lot to talk about. Hopefully we'll have a Texas decision and maybe some more news out of South Carolina and maybe some final decisions out of Quincy and San Joaquin coming down the line. Thank you for your time, Alan.
Okay.
George, finally we get to have a fun story that you and I get to talk to. It's been a rough week. We talked about St. James, talked about New Zealand, we talked about Kermit Gosnell after this, and it's nice to have a light, fluffy story, and it's not even about the Episcopalian Church, it's about the Methodist Church. Right here we're showing the video of a guy with a little glass container clicking, 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 spreading out the wafer before communion. Now, you're watching video right now. I'm going to stop the video, and George and I are going to slap our heads. I mean, obviously the Methodist Church had good intentions in this. They don't want to spread disease. But George, does communion spread disease?
No, it does not. And it's not just George Conger's opinion. The Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, the CDC, has put out a number of papers over the years about this question. Does a common communion cup spread communicable diseases? Now, I have a congregation of elderly people in Florida. Flu season is a big deal. I tell my parishioners, folks, remember to get your flu shot. I use hand sanitizer before, as I set the table up, for the communion. But I don't have a little plop, plop, plop gumball machine dispenser to prevent the spread of disease, because that's not how disease is spread. My problem is it's ugly. I mean, it's just aesthetically unpleasing. It's tacky. It's a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. They mean well, but oh my goodness.
Well, and that's just it. The problem of disease spread by the communion cup does not exist. Therefore, this is unnecessary. And we want to be sure when we're doing something aesthetically in the church, we're doing it for the right reasons, especially at the altar. I can't think of anything more personable than a priest coming up to me and going, click, click. And I put my hand out, and there comes the most holy of holy things, a little chip from a dispenser, and I have to put it to my mouth. I mean, it's not there for me, George. And
now, I don't want to beat up on the Methodists.
No.
It just so happens that the Cokesbury bookstore people, that's in their catalog if you want one yourself. Episcopal churches also have their, and ACNA churches have also really dreadful liturgical practices from time to time. When I was brand new, and when I was in seminary training, I trained at a charismatic Episcopal church, and the rector's wife would make the communion bread, and she loved to cook, and she made this pita bread for communion. And I remember the rector holding it up and breaking the bread, and as he broke it out came all these pimentos that she had baked into the communion bread. And I said to the rector as we were distributing it, is the body of Christ present in a pimento, or is it in the bread? Now, certain things go in and out of style. Shag carpets, fins on your Cadillac, and maybe this is a style that's already passed, but folks, don't go there.
Yeah, don't go there. It's not a problem that exists, and just for your own sanity and the wealth that comes from the Eucharist, don't go there. George, we've given ourselves an opportunity to talk about something light and fluffy, the Pez dispensers. Next is probably the hardest topic you and I will talk about in the next several episodes. We're going to talk about Kermit Gosnell from Pennsylvania. He's the now infamous abortionist who killed babies who were born to finish his job, to abort the babies. There's a lot to talk about and so many different facets of this. We're going to talk first about redefining things to make this work, the slippery slope, and the horror about having to discuss this at all. George, first, in order for this even to happen, we had to redefine what life really was. And I read science magazines all the time, and Science Today or Time Magazine, whatever. And I know we have the search for life out there. And I know if we find a single cell organism anywhere in the universe, that is life. If we find water, we almost want to make that life. We find a frozen, a ice cube on Mars, and obviously life was almost there. So, to a scientist, life is a single-cell organism anywhere outside of our atmosphere. Inside a womb, a single cell, a multiple cell, a fetus, a growing human being is not life in America and many parts of the world. We're able to redefine what life is in order for us to have a procedure where we can take what we don't want and kill it. And that happened because of redefinition of what life was and what rights are and what women's rights are and reproductive rights, and changing the whole dynamic from a baby to a woman's right. And we've ended up now with our hero, Kermit Gosnell, making every point we ever argued about, the slippery slope. What's the slippery slope here, George?
Well, the slippery slope is that it's legal to kill a baby if half of it is out of the mother's womb. That's called partial birth abortion. But if it's all the way out, then that's murder. And logically, that doesn't seem to make much sense. But according to the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, it's a moral act to kill half the baby if it's half out. And one of the things that really disturbs me about this whole issue is that the Executive Council of the Episcopal Church has given its full backing to the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice and the support for partial birth abortion, abortion on demand, abortion at any time for any reason whatsoever. And to me, this support of evil is a terrible... What can I say?
Well, let's be honest. The Episcopal Church isn't saying a thing, and they've been caught in their lies. The evil is silent right now because all their lies are revealed. The slippery slope, Kermit Gosnell, for all he's done, has revealed the very lie evil has given us in this, that it's just something we throw away. It's something we terminate. And I'm sorry if I sound really angry when I talk about this topic, but for a person to go adopt a child in the United States, it takes almost 18 months. It takes about $30,000. The paperwork to adopt a child would fill volumes. To abort a child, you need $200 because the government pays the other $200. There's no government supporting or helping finance adoption. They will support the removal and killing, but they won't support the adopting, the stopping of the killing. George, I want to finish. The horror that we're discussing with Kermit Gosnell, that he killed 20 people, the horror of all this is that we're not discussing the 40 million who've been killed since Roe v. Wade. There's a brand new face on the other end of the webcam, and this is David Jenkin. He runs the Canadian blog Anglican, Sazmadat. How do I pronounce this?
Well, Samizdat is the way you probably should pronounce it, but it's
That's
Russian.
French.
So.
you do the Z as Z for you, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's a Russian term from long ago. What does it mean to you?
Well, Samizdats were copies of literature distributed in the Soviet Union that were underground literature that people like Solzhenitsyn did not want the government to see. So they were secret documents, and people in them could say whatever they wanted to say. So when I came up with the name, really, the idea was that I was saying what I wanted to say about Anglicanism, and little did I know actually how applicable it would be in the future with this lawsuit, of course.
Yeah, there's a lot of irony in your name. Now, you've been blogging for quite a while now.
Yeah, I started in 2008, and that was the time that my church, St. Hilda's, left the Anglican Church of Canada and the Diocese of Niagara and joined the Anglican Network in Canada, ANIC. And that's when we were going through some lawsuits with the Diocese of Niagara. And I think part of why I started it was that I had been an Anglican for around 30 years since I became a Christian. And there had been so many things that I wanted to say that I didn't agree with that were going on in the Anglican Church. The thought of starting a blog finally gave me that chance to say many of the things I'd been bottling up 30 years.
Okay. Now, you were contacted via mail a couple months back from Bishop Bird, is his name?
Yes, Michael Bird.
Michael Bird in Canada. And he and his lawyer are accusing you of what we call slander in Canadian terms. It's a little easier to accuse somebody of that in Canadian law than American law, but you're being accused of slandered.
Well, it's libel, actually.
Libel, yeah, sorry.
Written, yeah. Yeah, the lawsuit is for defamation of character, and I was served on 19th of February, coincidentally, or perhaps not, 5 years to the day that my church was served its papers to take possession of a building. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, you decided to go public with that. I mean, obviously, you're put into a position now that this is one of the routes you're going.
Yeah, it is. Initially, I was rather stunned that this was happening. The bishop is seeking $400,000 in damages, which is a lot of money for anyone, I think, certainly for me. And so I was stunned, and my wife was stunned. We were all stunned, and we thought, what are we going to do? After speaking to my lawyer, we had some initial informal negotiations with the other side, and that really didn't get very far. And as time went by, I thought to myself, people need to know that this is happening. I can't keep this hidden and secret. I really think that other Anglicans and the church as a whole, the worldwide church, needs to know that this is happening. So I decided to go public, I guess it was maybe a couple of weeks ago now. And really by public, all I did was I published on my own blog the simple statement of facts of what was happening. And really it was picked up all over the place from there. And various articles have appeared. One of the latest, interestingly enough, is in the Anglican Journal, which is the official paper of the Anglican Church of Canada. And I think they've had more comments on that article, both for and against my position, than I've ever seen on any article, which is sort of interesting.
Well, it is interesting because we always say, well, isn't there freedom of speech laws and what applies, what doesn't? And in Canadian law, it's written that the only thing that has to be met is this person has to be offended. And that's a strange thing that you have going on there.
It's close to that. I mean, it's more complicated than that, as I'm discovering. We have something called the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which guarantees freedom of religion. It guarantees many things, but among them, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, but it leaves a lot of leeway as to one man's freedom of expression is another man's defamation, and that's really what I've come up against. And I believe I've been told, and I'm not sure about the truth of this, but I've been told that it's much harder to win this sort of lawsuit in the United States against the public when a public figure is involved. We will see how I do in Canada, but there have been some lawsuits that haven't gone well for the person expressing himself freely, shall we say. So I don't know what will happen.
Well, we're going to ask that the Anglican Unscripted audience keep you in your prayers, and we'll follow this through. And as this progresses, is it okay if we contact you again and get quick updates? With your lawyer's permission, of course. You don't want to go off the ranch.
Yeah, please do. Please do. I don't want to make my lawyer cry, but yes, please do. And the prayers, I think, are the most important thing, and I value those tremendously. And I do already have a lot of people praying, but even more would be even better. Okay.
Well, here's a link to the Anglican blog of Canada, where so much controversy is happening. And David, I look forward to talking to you later.
Thanks, Kevin.
George, let's close out episode 71. Last week, we put a call out for people to help raise money to go to GAFCON, and we got $1,000. It's enough to buy almost one plane ticket. Thank you. I didn't think we were going to get there so quick. I thought you and I would be groveling all summer long, George, and it's nice to know we're going to be going to GAFCON 2. We had a lot of fun at GAFCON 1, right?
Yes, we did. It was a wonderful, life-changing experience.
It was. And for reporters who follow bad news all the time, because bad news makes news, it was so cool to be at GAFCON 1 and watch the Jerusalem Declaration and watch the leaders of the church actually come together, say something, and then do it. And we don't see that much. We see lots of say somethings, but we don't get to see action after the say. GAFCON 2 is going to be something new for the Anglican Church, and because of you, my video camera will be there to record it. Now, let's be honest, I don't do this just for Kevin. I'm there on behalf of you, and we want to also get enough money for a hotel and to bring George out as well. You were at the last GAFCON, and George reports for Anglican Inc., Anglican TV. What other major PR articles do you report for, George?
Church of England newspaper, the Get Religion, and I wrote for the Washington Times from the last GAFCON meeting and some bunch of other newspapers in England and the United States. So it's, now you don't make a lot of money doing that, but you got to get yourself there. But
yeah, when they offer to pay you by the word, you're not making a lot of money, and that's the reality. Is there's no money in journalism anymore, so we have to beg, grovel, and plead for people like yourselves to help support. For the whole closing section here, we've had this Anglican.tv/donate, and that's where the website you go to. If you look on the left-hand side here, this is the address you can send donations to. If you look on the right-hand side here, this is the button you press that will take you to the PayPal website where you can make a donation to Anglican TV. We've raised almost $1,000, and that's really helped. That buys one plane ticket. We need to raise $2,000 more. The sooner we raise the money, the cheaper the ticket. If I wait till October to buy the ticket, that's almost 3 times more than I need to raise right now. So please donate. In a couple weeks, I'm going down to Texas to attend the Anglican Way Institute Summer Conference 2013. Dr. Gerald Bray will be there. What's his background, George?
Former professor at the Beeson School of Divinity at Stanford University. I believe he's currently the head of the Church Society in England, and he's a researcher at Cambridge right now.
He
a
also
very,
wrote for
very
Anglican
prominent
Inc., right?
theologian. Excuse
He
me?
wrote a couple articles for Anglican Inc.
Yes, he wrote some items for Anglican Inc. on the General Synod vote on women
So
bishops.
they've invited me down there to live stream and record it, and that'll be something we post on Anglican TV later this summer. So it's going to be a busy time. So I'll be there. I'll be at Forward in Faith. You got to see their commercial. And please go visit the Five Talents website because, lo and behold, they're an advertiser too. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger, and you've been watching episode 71 of Anglican Unscripted.
Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 71. You're watching two guys sit down in front of their computer and look for stories that happen to be Anglican. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger. And this week's episode is brought to you by Forward in Faith and the Five Talents Ministry. And today is May 9th, 2013.
It's cool we've given you an expanded speaking role for the intro. Okay, let's do it one more time. I don't remember what I said yesterday. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 71. You're watching two guys who like to wear black, buy on a collar, I don't have that, talking about all things Anglican. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger. And this week's episode is brought to you by Forward in Faith and the Five Talents Ministries. And this episode is going to have another thing. Is it five talents or five talents?
I'm trying to give you an expanded reading, role in the intro. Come on, it's simple stuff here.
Now, is it five talents or five talents ministries, or what do I call it?
I would just do Five Talents. They can make it up in the. They call themselves Five Talents. So
Okay.
Just say by Five Talents and Forward in Faith. And
Okay.
today, so. And it later.
Excuse me.
Having this up for one frame doesn't do anybody. Okay, what are you doing back there? There's a volcano in Florida. That's how the sinkholes happen.
Tastes great. Let's fill it.
He is right.